Hello again. Welcome back to Fibre Haptic Crafts. My name's Vicky or Victoria, and honestly those two options should be enough for anybody. It is a glorious 15 whole degrees here in Manchester in the UK. I've got my cup of tea, I'm wearing my dressing gown. After so many heat waves already this summer, to have it being this cool and chucking it down with rain in August, it's just glorious. I can actually think properly and I can breathe all the way in and all the way out again. This is my kind of weather. And to celebrate these perfect conditions for working, I'm going to do something today which I've been meaning to do since I started this channel. It's one of the reasons I wanted to start this channel, and that is I'm going to properly combine the junk journal and collage papercraft side of things with the embroidery side of things, which I've been doing a lot longer. Now I've got these collaged cards that I've made in various different sizes. They're just book pages, sometimes doubled up to give them double thickness, with all sorts of bits of newspaper and painting, other text on them, bits of collage paper that I've made myself in some cases. This is a bit of scrap paper that I'd scribbled all over and painted on. And then they've got, most of them have got focal points, often in the form of like a piece of pottery out of a guidebook that I cut up, because I found it in a charity shop and it was falling apart already, so I've been harvesting some of the pictures from those. And a lot of these, they're about done already. I could call them done. I think that one's maybe got enough going on. Some of the others, I'd like to add something just to give it just to kick it up another notch. Add another colour, another bit of texture in there. Maybe draw your eye to something, emphasize something, like for example this goat feels like he's floating in space a little bit, so I wouldn't mind adding something down here just to sort of anchor him. Slightly bigger one here which is almost done, but the outside is looking maybe a little bit bare. It just needs something else. So what I'm going to add to some of these today is some stitching. It's an extremely useful stitch for anyone doing collage and junk journals and mixed media, and it may sound extremely basic, it may sound really obvious, but there's a lot of variations and a lot of things you can do after the basic stitch, which doesn't require putting any extra holes in and weakening your cardboard further, but can make it look extremely effective. And there's so many variations of the basic things you can do to this. So what we're working with today is the running stitch. To form the running stitch, essentially you're just doing a line of individual basic stitches, just out, up through the paper, back down through the paper to form your stitch. I'll be doing a bit of that on screen in a minute. You can do it in straight lines, you could do it in a curvy line, you can stack them, so you could do a couple of rows where they're all parallel next to each other, and that can create quite a nice effect, quite a wide band of stitches. You can stagger them, and again that creates an effect. You can do them regularly or irregularly, and you can also start weaving other threads in between your stitches or wrapping the stitch, again with other coloured thread. And all of these extra things that I've done here and here, all you end up with on the back is just your basic running stitch, your initial set of holes. So it really is a fantastic stitch to play with if you are wanting to add something to a collage or a mixed media piece or your junk journal, but you don't want to start stabbing lots and lots of holes in your card and weakening it. Now, to add my holes, what I'm using, and you may have seen me use this before, is my tailor's awl. Essentially just a spike with a smooth handle so that you can grip that quite firmly, and some padding to go under the paper when I stab it. And in my case, I've got a folded up piece of felt, but you could use a wad of fabric. You could use quite a thick sponge with some cardboard under it, or just a big stack of corrugated card would work. Anything that you, with a bit of give to it, but enough substance that you're not going to go all the way through accidentally and hurt your surface underneath. And I've already started on this one here. All I did in this case, I've got 2 rows of holes. You might be able to see there. Don't know if you can see any easier on the back. Possibly not so much. Got 2 rows of holes, and all I did here was I took my ruler, I stabbed with the awl every centimetre. In this case, I decided to offset my second row of stitches. So turned it round, put my ruler down again, got my markings about halfway between the existing stitches, and did every centimetre again. So in this case, I've marked it out myself, just with the ruler. I'm thinking in this case, for this one, I would quite like a spiral of stitches, and I think I'd like a big spiral up here and possibly a smaller spiral here. Now I could just mark this out from scratch. I could gently draw on a spiral, or possibly draw it on the back if I'm not sure I'd be able to rub it out properly. So I could do that and then stab at intervals all round. What I've done already though is I've made myself a template where I did just that. So I've just drawn a loose spiral, just free-handed it onto here. I've already stabbed through roughly the sort of spacing that I want. So it's a bit tricky because you can't necessarily see where you're putting this, I guess, unless I cut this out as a smaller stem up. I'm sorry, I can't talk today. Stencil. But I think about there is going to be right. I'm going to have that sort of arm of it ending there. That seems okay. The middle's going to be on my green bit here. Yeah, I'm calling that about right. And I'm going to take the awl, and those existing holes I'm just going to stab through gently until I can feel it going through to the felt. There we go, I've got my big one at the top, and that is a slightly smaller one, and I flip the stencil over the other way so that this one reverses. Now I'm going to mark a couple of others while I'm here. So this one, what I want to do is pull this blurred section here into the rest of it so that this becomes less of a focal point, and this remains sort of slightly clearer and becomes a bit more of a focal point, hopefully. This blurred looking section, that's done by putting a very thin layer of gesso over the collage, which I did. And then I've also added a little bit of blue watercolour on there. just to colour it, and that's because I thought this section here was looking far too busy, and so I wanted to calm it down a bit. And now that I have calmed it down, it's looking a little bit strange and sticking out, so I want to pull it back in to the rest of the piece. And I'm going to do that by putting two curved lines, parallel curved lines over here. At least that's my plan. Position that about there. I will probably end up trimming off some of the rough edge of the card here, so I don't want to go too close to the edge. I've got my parallel circles, half circles drawn out. I just drew around a coaster, I think, and then like a little glass pot. Whoop, gone right off the edge there. Do those again in a minute. I'm just going to stab through all of these again. So I'll do this, and I'll put some lines on my final card here after that. Give you some nice music to listen to in the meantime, and then I'll come back and we can start stitching. So that's all my holes made. Now I'm going to do my basic running stitches on all of these. I've picked out a few colours of embroidery floss and pearl cotton, quite a thin pearl cotton. I think this is number 8. Yeah, so towards the thinner end of pearl cotton. I'm probably going to use, I think, 3 strands of the embroidery floss. Might drop down to 2 if that's starting to look a bit too chunky. I will play that by ear. I've picked out some colours that are either already on the pieces or will complement it quite well. So in this case I'm going to do some pale yellow lines across here, so diagonally going up here. And yeah, I think I'll just sit and I'll do all of the running stitches. I might not show you all of it, but I'll at least show you a bit, probably sped up slightly. And then I will come back and show you how I'm going to further embellish those running stitches using different techniques. So first of all, I've got to sort my cotton out. This is just from a whole box of odds and ends that I've collected from different cross-stitch and embroidery projects, bits that I've bought over the years. I could not tell you what colour any of this corresponds to with any of the big brands. I have no clue. I just pick through and see what I like the look of. I'm going to do embroiderer's knot. 1, 2, 3 should secure it enough, I hope. There we go. I'm going to start at the first hole down here. Come up through that first one there. And down through the next. Going to be quite big stitches here. These are 1 centimetre apart. So 1 stitch there. Up through the next, and then down. Just visually trying to keep track of which line I'm following, making sure I don't accidentally cross over onto the other line. Up, whoop, and down. And up. Where's my next one? There. Now this needle is sharp enough and the paper is thin enough that I could probably have done this without pre-making the holes. I probably could have just sat here and stabbed through. However, I find that doing that in mid-air over and over can start to put a lot of pressure on the paper. So if you're at all worried about pieces coming loose or the paper getting weakened or you're manipulating it too much, then stabbing the holes to start with is on the whole a much better way to do it. Alright, so what's happened here is I didn't count how many holes I had. Ideally, you want to finish on a hole that takes you through to the back. So I'm just going to stab one extra one here, just with my needle, going through onto the felt. There we go, loose end, now through to the back. And then on the back of my piece, what I'm going to do is hop over to the next row. I bet you I'm going to have the exact same problem when I get to the other end of here, but I'll deal with that when I come to it. So back out there. So the hopping across, the break in our parallel lines is happening there. And I'm going to go all the way up this row. Alright, I am back. I have acquired my second cup of tea, although this one's a decaf because it's 10 o'clock at night, and I have got my basic running stitches down to form the start of my shapes. You can see in each case it gives you essentially a, well, not a dotted line, but a broken line on each one, and depending on the background you may or may not be able to make out the shape very clearly. Now perhaps that broken effect, that sort of fainter dotted line, is what you're going for. In each of these cases I want to add something else to it to emphasize that shape even more. And I want to be able to do that without adding any more holes or any more stitching and bulk to the back of this. So as it stands, the back is more or less the same as the front stitch wise, except that you've got the knots and you've got the loose ends. So that's something to bear in mind if you're doing this on a junk journal page. You can get some quite nice shapes on the back as well, but you will have to do something about your loose ends. Maybe cover those with a bit of washi tape, you know, stick a piece of paper over them, something like that. But you do get the start of quite a nice pattern on your next page as well, which can be quite useful if you don't want to start from nothing on the other side. So like I said, with my sort of crib card here, there are a few different ways that you can embellish your basic running stitch. The first one I'm going to show you is whipping or wrapping your stitch. I'm going to do this in the same colour that I did my circle with, because on this circle I come up to the top. Again, that's just the way that this has ended up working out, because then I didn't count the stitches, but in this case it's quite useful because it means I get to go around this again in the same thread. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to pass it right to left under that stitch, and then under the next one again, take my thread over here and go right to left, and again, and again, all the way around the circle. And that's filling in the gaps in an ever so slightly twisted way. So I'll go around and do all of that. It doesn't matter if you go right to left or left to right. The main thing is that you do it consistently every time, so that you are wrapping those threads and you're pulling through the excess, but you're not pulling it super tight. Hopefully we've got enough to get around there, just about, maybe. It's going to be very annoying if we don't. You can see the thread starting to get a little bit ratty towards the end. You should just about win this game of thread chicken, I believe. Yep. And then at the end here, we're just going to go down that final hole just to fill in that stitch that hasn't been done on the first round. Hard to see because it's a black background, but we're going to go down that final hole there. And we're going to tie that off on the back. Come on, get off the needle. There we go. Tie it off. So we now have a lovely, distinct circle, which I think just pulls everything together and balances out this circle and its pale frame down here. Now if we wanted, I don't think this needs it, if we wanted we could then go in with another colour, maybe in this case a paler grey, and we could wrap those threads again but going the other way. And in this case we could pick any of these holes to come up through from the back, so tie a knot, come up through any of those holes, start whipping the thread the other way, and then again go back down the final hole to finish it off and tie it off on the back. But I think that's effective enough as it stands. So I think I'm going to leave it like that. You can also, you don't have to use the same thickness of thread to wrap it. You don't actually have to use thread at all. You could use a very thin ribbon, wind it all around there. And if you're doing that, I think it looks quite nice if you start at the bottom, you do all your wrapping and you leave the loose ends on the front and you tie them off on the front with a little bit of a knot or a bow, so you get sort of a bit of a wreath shape, like a raised ribbon wreath going on your page or on your collage. That can look quite effective as well. So that's my first one. That's whipping or wrapping the stitch by going over and over it from the same side every time. Now I've left a tail on this one as well. And in this case I am going to weave this thread between my two rows of stitches. And there's a couple of different patterns you can do with this. In fact, there's loads of different patterns you can do with this. You can see on this one I've gone between the first and second rows, and then again between the second and third rows, so that's a sort of double zigzag effect. And then with this one, I haven't pulled it quite as tightly around the corners, so we've got a big sweeping loop going once between all 3 rows. So I'm not totally sure what I'm going to do with this until I get started. There should be 1 stitch on the outside for every stitch on the inside loop there, unless I have miscounted. I guess we'll find out. So I've not tied this off fully on the back, or I've sort of tied it but I've not snipped it. Just thread my needle again. And let's see what we can achieve to lightly fill in that space and pull those 2 lines together. So I think ideally I need to come up through this hole on the bottom here. And let's go above there. Coming down. Okay, good shape so far. Now maybe down under there. Okay. Go from above that. Down under that. Let's see if we just carry on that pattern. I think the first one is going to look a little bit different, so we might end up amending this. Well, you can't amend it, we end up going back and redoing it, but let's just see what this looks like. Okay, up through the lower one, down through the upper one, up through the lower, down through the upper. Yeah, I think that's going to be quite a nice pattern. I am not sold on how it looks at the start though. And I'm not quite sure how to fix that beyond, I think maybe starting at that hole and cutting out this bit here. So yeah, let's just undo that, and all we're doing to undo it is just take the needle off and then put it under the last sort of full loop that you made and gently pull the stitch out. You don't have to try to stitch your way back through the way you came, you just gently gently pull those stitches out. Whoop. Right, what did I say I was going to do then? So instead of coming through this hole here, I think I'm going to start my stitches up here. See what's going on in the back. Yep, that's loose. Pull that back up there. This is one of the fun things about this process, but also, to be honest, quite a frustrating aspect of this process is you don't necessarily know how things are going to turn out. Doesn't matter how often you've done it. It can be quite tricky to visualize exactly what's going to happen. Right, so down through that one, up through that one. Happily, with this sort of weaving process, it is extremely easy to fix, as you've just seen. So down through the upper, up through the lower, and so on and so forth. I might turn it around that way. And look at our lovely zigzag forming. It's sort of a bunch of Roman numerals kind of coming around with the serifs on. What What I'm probably going to do in the end with this is just trim off these edges where they don't quite match. I'll just square it all off on my cutting mat, using the lines on my cutting mat and a ruler and a good sharp craft knife. Square that all off, and then probably on my sewing machine I will go around quite close to the edges and just do a straight stitch on the machine. Depending on what I want to use this for, I might put an extra card backing on here before I stitch it. I could also leave one side clear of stitching and make this into a pocket for sticking in a journal, or maybe making it into a sort of tag with a pocket, anything like that. But I think it will need a bit of a frame around it, not least because the edges are a little bit higgledy-piggledy, a little bit busy. Overall though, I am really quite happy with this mess of stuff. That flower shape there was just cut out with a craft punch, which I ended up buying secondhand in like a job lot of punches, so I've not been using this very often. But to cut through a bit of coloured paper and show a different colour underneath, it's proven quite effective in a few places. Nearly at the end, down here, and I think with this I'm gonna, well, come in from the top again. Let's see, I could finish it off. Yeah, I think I'll finish it off. I could have gone for that hole there, pull it a bit towards that edge, which I guess matches that a bit better, but no, I think I'm going to pull it all the way to the final hole there. There we go. Now, how effective did that look? That's a really sort of complicated looking set of stitches, but it's all on the front. All that complexity is on the front there, and on the back it's remained pretty simple, and it's all fairly flat. Now, if you wanted to enhance that even more, we could also slip a piece of ribbon under here, some twisted up tissue paper maybe. There's all sorts of things that you could stitch down and attach down with this weaving effect between two rows of running stitches. And if you did it as straight stitches as well, you could slip maybe a very slim journaling card between them, something like that, or a bookmark. So yeah, lots of possibilities with this beyond just the decorative effect. Tie this onto the back. I think I'm going to tie it under that stitch, because it's always nice to find an independently secure stitch to tie under. And by independent, I mean the tightness of this stitch is not dependent on us tying off this loose end. This loose end is very, very far removed from that stitch. Otherwise, it can just be a little bit harder to tie everything off. There we go. That's our final knot. Snip that off. Yeah, that I think has added some interest to this side. It's pulled that bit of gesso and watercolour into the rest of the piece again, and it's left got a main focal point here and a bit of secondary focus over here. So once that's trimmed off and framed, I think it's going to look really pretty good. Okay, the next variation which I'm going to show you, and I'm going to do it on this one, is known as double running stitch. And essentially what this does, and I've got an example over here, is it fills in the missing stitches, and you can do it either in the same colour, which is what I've done across the top here in this grey, or what's really effective is you fill them in with a different colour. And so you get this lovely alternating solid line happening, which looks really good as a straight line or more or less straight, and equally as good in a curved line like this. This is double running stitch, and you're essentially doing the same thing that you have already done, but going the opposite way through your holes. So got some orange thread here, which I hope will work alternating with that yellow. It's 2 strands. Go through the normal thread. Yep, it's 2 strands, which is the same as what I've got on here. This does look best, I think, if you use the same thickness of thread to fill in the gaps, so it looks like a coherent, continuous decorative element. Okay, so we came up through that hole and went back down through this one. So now what we need to do is come up through that second hole that we went down, and you can see what's going on. You can usually see what's going on in the back. You can see we've got a gap here, so where there is a stitch on this side, we want the stitch to be on the other side. So we are going up. Let's see, can we find the right one? Yep, we're going up that one there and down that one where we came up before. Yeah. Oops. It's a little complicated on the back because of the way I've woven things in. Go up through that one and down through there. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that choice of colours. Actually, that yellow was looking really pale, but now that we are filling it in, I think the line is becoming more obvious, and that sort of different texture of yellow over the yellows that are already there is starting to look more effective. The orange over that deep purple. Lovely set of colours going on here. Look up again. I think over this darker red is where the yellow is really going to come into its own, and the orange is going to start to get a little bit more lost. There we go. Back down there. And then same as we did before where we crossed over to the other line on the back, we're going to cross over to that line there. Again, coming up where we went down with the previous set of stitches, and back down. Again. Now I'm a little bit undecided on this one. There's not a huge amount of contrast going on. There's nothing really making this pop. I might try and add a third row of these stitches in the same colours. I think that might look quite effective. I'll put a border on, I'll trim it off and put a border on, same as I'm doing with the others. I'll go around on the sewing machine and then I'll see if it needs anything else. It might be that it could do with some darker lines, maybe pulling these half circles back into the rest of it, and possibly some matching stamping on each of those. I'm not sure. I think they're looking a little bit bare. Maybe it's because the lined paper just sort of cries out for something else to be on it. It's meant to be written on. Maybe that's why they're looking a little bit empty. Right, now where on earth am I stitching into? There, yeah, that's where it is. And down the last one. So that is our double running stitch, giving a beautifully straight line made of 2 alternating colours. Now I've got one more final variation to show you, and then I'm going to call it a day, or well, call it a night at this point, I guess. Okay. Oh, that looks quite good going through the black and white actually. Yeah, that's quite effective. I might possibly leave a bit of a gap when I put the backing on, or I'll just remember that effect and use it on something else. But yeah, I quite like that. Okay, now with this I'm going to do it's a variation on the wrapping and the weaving. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this quite dark blue. It's somewhere in between this blue of the collage paper and then, I don't know how well you can see, but there's some dark blue ink marks on this paper here. It just about works with the numbers from the map as well. So this darker blue is going to come in. Now, how many strands did I use for this? This is 3 strands. This is only 2. I think I am going to ignore that bit for now, and I'm going to pull out 3 strands of this. Don't think 2 is quite going to be thick enough. Go cut off about the length from the end of my index finger to my elbow. Anytime you're doing this kind of embroidery, well, any kind of embroidery really, and you want to avoid getting too many knots and things happening, then that's about the right length of thread to cut off. It's from the tip of your fingers down to your elbow. It's a good length to handle. You may think it's more efficient to cut off more so that you don't have to come to the end of your thread so often, but the amount of messes you can get yourself in when you've got a long trailing loop of thread to handle, it's definitely worth it just to use the more manageable lengths. Okay, yeah, big loopy knot. Okay, so I think what's going to be easiest is if I work from the outside of the spiral in. I think you'll be able to see better what it is that I'm doing. So I'm going to start at the end here, come up through that loop, and it is very similar to the whipping that we did, except that this time, instead of going in from the same side every time and taking the thread over, we are just going to wobble in and out of those stitches. So I'm going to go from right to left here. Not that you can entirely tell at the beginning. And then I'm going to go from left to right there. And I'm going to keep it fairly loose. And back that way. And back out that way. We're just going to get, in a sense, filling in those gaps, leaving a lot of the original colour visible, so we're not covering up these stitches at any point. That's the main difference with the whipping. Now we're just having a gently meandering wobbly line, filling in that shape. And this can give a beautifully sort of organic effect. She's great for these spirals because it can look a little bit more like a seashell sort of, is it like a nautilus kind of shape? Which I think works quite well with the wavy lines we've got going on, these sort of organic blob shapes, the leaf, which I think I'm gonna put a line of stitching up the middle of this leaf at some point as well, or at least do something to emphasize that leaf shape and break up that pink slightly. Okay, that way, back. And out and back, and I'm hoping that even in the middle, when it's having to fight with all of these other marks, that the shape will become a bit more distinct. Let's see if that actually happens. Again, it's really hard to predict how these things are going to look until they're finished, but that's why we do this. That's why we're not doing a paint by numbers in this instance. We're not directly copying what somebody else has done. We are making up our own designs, and we are enjoying, hopefully enjoying, the process. And if we don't like what we've done, we put it to one side to look at again later, and we either improve on it later, or we start on another project and we use what we've learned. It is the process which is the important thing, and not this particular result. Back up through there. Now, this is why I started on the outside and not on the inside, because by the time we've got to that final stitch there, it's not totally clear how we're going to get our distinct line. I think I'm going to go down from above. Yep, and then I think down that final hole there, and that will have to do. Now, that is a much more distinct spiral shape, which I think it's not necessarily calmed that corner down, but it's a lot better than our broken line, and I think it's, yeah, it's given us more interest in that corner. I'm happy with that effect. Tie that off on the back. That wasn't quite a proper knot. I didn't quite catch my loop in there. Let's try that again. There we go, that's done it. Hook that off. Now maybe you can see that broken line just across the text. Even though the text is a little bit busy in itself, you can still see the spiral quite distinctly. So it's only really on this very busy background that the pink stitches on their own weren't quite enough. You can kind of see with the horse racing here, there's a bit too much going on at the background for that to be super distinct. Oh, I can hear a kitty calling me. I'm going to leave off there for now. So these are our different variations. I will add a picture at the end of what that last bit looks like, and you'll be able to see if I add any more to that and to that. So that is a very brief introduction to a few things that you can do with the humble running stitch to add some extra colour, texture, structure to your collages, your mixed media pieces and junk journaling. I will do another couple of videos similar to this where I look into chain stitches, some variations on chains and some other fancy things, all of which will produce maximum impact on the front side while sort of minimizing the bulk on the back. Oh, that is a very urgent sounding cat. And yeah, hope you enjoyed that. Please do like, subscribe, comment if there's a particular stitch you'd like me to do, or anything else you think it would be useful for me to show you. I can look into all sorts of things. Yeah, other than that, I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.